One of Botticelli's more famous paintings is of course going to be The Birth of Venus. This is a painting of Botticelli's visual account of a poem recounting the birth of Venus. Now, let's go back to a little bit of mythology before I go much further. According to Greek mythology, Venus is one of the oldest gods and is born from the phallus of Uranus, which is cut off by his son Kronos and thrown into the sea. And when that phallus hits the water, it develops into sea foam, and eventually from this sea foam is born the goddess Aphrodite, or Venus, the goddess of human fertility. Now, by the Renaissance, she's seen as a goddess of beauty, but the Greeks would have understood her far more as a goddess of fertility, and there is a distinct difference. You can be beautiful and not fertile. You can also be fertile and not beautiful. They are two distinct things. So keep that in mind whenever we're talking about Aphrodite or Venus. Here, what you see is Zephyrus carrying Chloris, once again, the same two characters from the Primavera. And we see flowers and early spring being blown from them as they, well, primarily Zephyrus, blows Venus, born of sea foam, on a cockle shell to Cyprus. There, a nymph will run to meet her with a decorated mantle. Here, Venus is nude. Now, this is a great risk in a piece of this size, which could easily have raised cries of paganism. Also, it's a female nude. Now, up until this point, we've talked about a couple of nudes, but they've been male nudes. For example, the David. When you get female nudes and it's not Eve, well, that's kind of an issue. What is the issue? Remember, women sin with their body. They sin by simply existing in the view of the church. And so this image would be seen as near pornographic to them. So it's a big risk that Botticelli's actually taking. Now, oftentimes we'll look at this and say, well, that's a classical nude, but it's not. So when you look at the Venus here, you'll notice if I drop a line from her navel straight down, that she's standing completely to one side of the line. What does that mean? That means Venus isn't balanced. She would fall down. Now, this is a vast change from what we would have seen in the classical world. For example, the Venus de Milo, which you see on the right, where if I drop that line, you notice it drops right down to the base of the leg, which is holding all of her weight. So here we have an understanding of the classical nude. Here, Botticelli is taking some license with it. He's doing it because this is based on a poem. It's really a lyrical image. And so he can create something that lacks some of that realism that we might otherwise expect. After all, we're looking at a scene from mythology. And for them, this is a story. For the Greeks, the Venus de Milo is a god. There's a difference between a story and a god, and a story where they say it's a god, but we know it's a story because this is Christian Italy in the 15th century. Now also notice that the Venus does not cover herself in the same manner as Eve. This is supposed to be modesty rather than shame. So she's covering herself because she's trying to do the right thing rather than a sense of shame that people can see her nakedness. It really gets into that idea of naked versus nude. The issue between them, or the really big defining feature between the two, is intention. If you depict, or if you were to send a photo of yourself to someone that's intended to go to, then it's a nude. There's intention behind it. If, however, that person passes it to someone else, now it's naked. You were never meant to be seen that way. So it's all about intention. And that's what we're seeing here. This is the Venus who is knowingly nude without any concern for modesty. He's also avoided the science of perspective. It's not as important here because he's creating or trying to create visual poetry on the canvas. So you'll notice there's no atmospheric perspective. There's no real linear perspective. There's no real sense of the bodies in balance like we would see with other images. This poetic style also appealed to the lyricism and courtliness that appealed to his Florentine patrons, such as the Medici. It is ultimately not a nude of a goddess so much as a lyrical painting based on a poem.